Hi, everybody. So, as I told you, we were going to be doing a virtual lecture today. So, hello from my dining room, my coffee cart. Excited to see you guys. Well, not really see you guys. Excited to be seen by you guys. I don't know. It's weird. Anyway, let's get into it. All right. So, today we're talking about Chapter 9 Attitudes, Emotions, and Work. Let's go. All right. So first, we're talking about work attitudes. So that all launches with job satisfaction. Basically, the positive attitude or emotional state resulting from appraisal of one's job. So in the early period of job satisfaction research, found that both job-related and individual difference variables might influence job satisfaction. Other influences included perceptions of workers, like the organizational lighting or do they have necessary tools. So all of those things could impact whether or not one was satisfied at work. Based on these studies, early IO psychologists believed that morale and production were closely linked. It later became evident that that's not necessarily true. And throughout the theory studies, it became obvious that worker attitudes and job satisfaction are correlated, not necessarily morale and production. Attitudes are defined as relatively stable feelings or beliefs that are directed towards specific persons, groups, ideas, jobs, or other objects. So here you can see a sample of the effects of events and agents and job satisfaction. So you can see on the left, there's the sources, and on the right here are different effects. So the work itself is challenging. So that could be mentally challenging work. If they successfully accomplish that, it's satisfying, right? But tiring work is not satisfying. So different elements. And then we also have this breakdown, which talks about all the different components that fall within job satisfaction. So first you have like the job characteristics themselves, or organizational characteristics, and then that correlates with consequences, right? So we see how those would come together in elements of organizational commitment, which we're going to talk about, perceived stress, which we touch on a little bit in this chapter, but we talk about in later chapters, and then how that can implicate in regards to poor health and so on and so forth. So getting on to how do we measure job satisfaction? So first, there's two major facets. The first is overall satisfaction, which results either from mathematically combining scores based on satisfaction or a single overall evaluation rating of the job. And then there's facet satisfaction, which is where it's that information is gathered specific to elements of the job satisfaction. So here is a very common overall satisfaction scale done by Kunin in 1955. The question is, overall, how satisfied are you with your current job? And then you would select the face. You should recognize this concept because we see it in a lot of other spheres. It's often used for things like food service, customer service, or even like pain or uncomfortableness ratings in regards to like medical field. So this is like a very common scale that's used. Another one that is used in the overall job satisfaction would be the 5-item scale, which was introduced in 2001 with these 5 statements. I feel fairly satisfied. Most days I am enthusiastic about my work. Each day at work seems like it will never end. I find real enjoyment in my work. I consider my job to be rather unpleasant. And so rating on where you would fall on that scale. So these are more facet satisfaction measures, right? So the first we have the Job Descriptive Index, JDI. So this would assess satisfaction within the work itself regarding things like like elements of the job itself, supervision, people, pay, promotion. It is tends to be very lengthy, the JDI. It's heavily researched. It has 72 different items. And one of the downsides in regards to this JDI is that it doesn't give detail on what causes the dissatisfaction. So that doesn't really speak to how do we intervene, how do we fix the problems with job dissatisfaction. Another element of facet satisfaction is the Minnesota Satisfaction Questionnaire, or the MSQ, that calculates extrinsic and intrinsic satisfaction scores. It only uses 5 items per area and has a 20 item for a shorter or 100 item for the longer scale. And it calculates, again, intrinsic and extrinsic satisfaction. So as we know, intrinsic means like satisfaction within oneself. Extrinsic is outside, right? Outside factors. So these, the concept of job satisfaction is connected to commitment, right? So commitment's defined as the psychological and emotional attachment an individual feels to a relationship, organization, goal, or occupation. It's proposed that organizational commitment has 3 different elements. The first is acceptance and belief in an organization's values. Second, a willingness to exert effort on behalf of the organization to help meet the goals of that organization. And third is a strong desire to remain in the organization. So we've talked about motivation and job commitment already, and we're going to talk about personal and value and org value alignment in a later chapter. But here we're mainly going to be focusing on number 3, which is a strong desire to remain in the organization. So that takes the place of different forms of organizational commitment. First, we have affective commitment, which is emotional attachment to an organization. Organizational commitment within these 3 categories is previously believed that an individual was less likely to leave if they were committed than one that's not committed. But there's this additional factor to consider, right? Which is occupational commitment, which is commitment to a particular occupational field, including affective, continuance, and normative commitment, right? So do you have this attachment to the specific organization? Another piece is continuance commitment, which is the cost of leaving the organization. So taking into consideration what's the cost of leaving. And the normative commitment is the feeling obligated to remain in the organization for whatever reason. So going into different variables of commitment, there's absenteeism and turnover, which we've talked about before. And these can only be understood when considering multiple forms of commitment and multiple foundations for those commitments. So other areas of this that we see are job embeddedness, that's when there are many and varied commitments that an individual feels towards the organization regarding like coworkers or teams they're a part of, or even elements of like the career. Like I feel committed to the career. So it could be like perceiving my fit and like, oh, I fit in the job in the organization. Or it also could connect to like what you would say or what a worker would say if they were going to sacrifice in leaving their jobs. Another element that we see in regards to individual commitment is this thing called hobo syndrome, which is basically like a periodic itch to move from job to job. So that isn't also something to consider. All right, moving into organizational identification, or OID. So that's the process whereby individuals derive a feeling of pride and esteem from their association with an organization. So it's seen frequently in sports, like we will win. Well, who is the we, right? You're not playing on the field. So we also see this within organizations. It could be that feeling of like a career, a group, an organization, or occupation, like, right? Like I work in education. I am an adjunct professor. I work for Vanguard University. I am a teacher. So identifying with elements of the job and taking pride in that. There's the opposite side of the coin, which is called disidentification. So that's where you or an individual would take pains to distance themselves from the organization. So here we see an example of the OID. So you can see that the chart has 2 different circles. the rectangles within the two circles, one represents you as the individual, the other represents the organization you would belong to. Each rectangle, the circles overlap differently. The first, right, they're totally separate, two separate situations I don't identify at all. The last, number 7, is where they completely overlap and there's no differentiation between yourself and the organization. So out of the 7, people are asked, like, where do you see yourself and your occupation aligning? And then here's another kind of example of that when it comes to identifying disidentification, right? So like neutral identification, I kind of see there's a strong identification, and ambivalent or strong disidentification. So moving into engagement, right? Engagement, positive work-related state of mind that includes high levels of energy, enthusiasm, and identification with one's work. So this overlaps positively with job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and job involvement, but is distanced from these constructs and has important organizational implications. For example, increased engagement on the part of workers is related to increased task and contextual performance. So moving into moods, emotions, attitudes, and behavior. So a mood, right, is generalized feeling not identified with a particular stimulus, not sufficiently intense to interrupt ongoing thought processes, whereas emotions are normally associated with specific events and occurrences. They're intense enough to disrupt thought processes. So interestingly, few people report actually feeling dissatisfied at work. 12% actually. And it honestly hasn't deviated from that percentage for decades. But according to modern media, right, comedians, TikToks, it seems like it would be otherwise, right? There's this disparity between what the science says, what the data-based information is, which is that for the most part, people are very satisfied at work, and what like the common sense beliefs are, or the assumptions are, which is that most people are not satisfied at work. Moods and emotions are associated with work behaviors, including org citizenship behavior, task performance, creative problem solving, and withdrawal behaviors like absenteeism and turnover, which we've talked about in previous chapters. So here's an affect circumplex, which is basically opposite emotions appear directly across from each other. So people would be shown this wheel, this scale, and identify where on the continuum do they fall on opposing emotions, right? Opposing elements. So we have unhappy, sad, or gloomy as opposite of happy, cheerful, delighted. So these are very generic emotions, not necessarily specific to work. So there was this kind of new release of emotions, or like identification of emotions that are specific to work, and they break into 3 categories. The first is process emotions, which is resulting from the consideration of the tasks that you're doing. Perspective emotions, which is from the tasks anticipating that you're going to do. And then retrospective is considering tasks that you've already completed. So they're all task related emotions. Moving into dispositions and affectivity. So NA, or negative affectivity, is often referred to as neuroticism, and those with high NA are prone to experience a diverse array of negative mood states, whereas positive affectivity, which is often referred to as extroversion, high PA individuals often describe themselves as cheerful, enthusiastic, competent, active, and energetic. So there's this question of like personality characteristics are likely to influence moods, but not necessarily discrete emotions. So there's a question of, is this something that's like predisposed? Is there a genetic connection? Well, in 1986, a study was done that showed that disposition within adolescents predicted job satisfaction as long as 50 years later. Additional research has been conducted in this controversial area, but considerably more research is necessary on the links between genetics and job satisfaction. So no definitive answer. Moving into core evaluations, right? Assessments that individuals make of their circumstances includes things like self-esteem, self-efficacy, LOC, has effects on both jobs and life satisfaction, right? So we've seen this correlation within Ocean, right? We've talked about that before. So here's that kind of breakdown visually. So On the left, you have these elements of personality elements, right? Like self-esteem, self-efficacy, locus of control, neuroticism. And those impact elements of work, right? Perceptions of work characteristics, overall job satisfaction, overall life satisfaction. So this is looking into core evaluations, core self-evaluations. How do I look at myself, and what implications do those have on things outside of myself, like work or life? Going into withdrawal behaviors. So there's work withdrawal, which is an attempt to withdraw from work but maintain ties to the organization and work role. It includes things like lateness and absenteeism, which we've talked about. We've also, when we talked about this, we've correlated it with this concept of quiet quitting, right? Which is where people are kind of doing the bare minimum at work, and like, clocking out immediately when it's time to leave and things like that. So is there connection between work withdrawal and quiet quitting? Depends on who you ask, but technically no, even though media makes it seem like they're the same. Quiet quitting is something that is like with not outwardly setting boundaries within the workplace, but doing it kind of subvertently, right? I only do what I'm required. I only perform what's on my job description. I clock in and clock out only within the designated times. I have set those boundaries. I don't go above and beyond, right? Whereas work withdrawal is more connected to like negative behavior. Then there's job withdrawal, right? Which is willingness to sever ties to the organization and work role, which is usually connected to an intention to quit or retire. And then there's progression hypotheses. So moving into special topics related to attitudes and emotions, right? We see that there's a lot of effects within unemployment. In 2007, right when we hit our first economic crash of the 21st century, we saw elements of low psychological health within individuals that were unemployed. It was a result of the cause of unemployment because it was seen that when there was a return to paid employment, it significantly increased psychological health. So these results were seen in an increase in depression, insomnia, irritability, lack of confidence, inability to concentrate, general anxiety. And so War, who was one of an IO psychologist, wanted to find out why. And he found these connections to job loss. So these were impacted in regards to there's a reduction of income and daily variety, right? I don't have something kind of like to give me purpose. There's a suspension of typical goal setting or guiding day-to-day activities. There's fewer decisions to make, so less feeling of autonomy or control. There's no new skill development, and then the old skill atrophy, meaning you start losing your old skills and you're not developing any new skills. So there's an overall skill loss. And then social relationships, right? Because a lot of adult relationships are made within organizations like work or even school, as you guys know. So there's this new kind of type of work that has become very popular, especially recently, called telecommuting, which is basically when work tasks can be accomplished from distant location using electronic communication. The number of telecommuters are going to continue to rise, especially in light of COVID. And for many telecommuters, strategic planning skills and self-reported productivity increase because they have more locus of control, and there's a higher satisfaction that's reported. So remote work and remote learning, kind of see how I did that. I'm interested to hear on Wednesday what you guys thought of this telelearning experience, right? If you enjoyed it, if you preferred it or not. But there are some negative impacts, right, of telecommuting or remote work or remote learning, right? So there's this concern with alienation. There's concern with loss of sense of identity. There could be issues regarding like promotion or networking, and then also like a disillusionment within the organization due to a lack of growth or promotional opportunities. So those are things that need to be addressed and are currently being talked about within this scope. Here's like just a fun little I don't know, comic for you guys. Okay, moving on. So that connects very strongly to work-family balance, or what we also call work-life balance, right? Which is satisfaction that one experiences at work is in part affected by the satisfaction that one experiences in non-work and vice versa. So most research focuses on the lack of work-family or work-life balance. And there's this correlation between there's a satisfaction at work and a satisfaction at home, right? There is a connection there. So what is the most substantial influence? Well, organizational culture that supports family values is incredibly influential on whether one sees themselves as being satisfied in their workplace and having a healthy work-life balance. So what that could look like is it's organizations that offer like on-site life services like childcare or like even a gym or, or food offerings or dry cleaning or like a maid service connection or even housing or cars, right? These are life services that are correlated with organizations. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could also be things like having a really great medical leave or maternity, paternity leave system, or offering employees sabbaticals or partial sabbaticals and things like that. But there are some negative influences on work-life balance, right? We have electronically enhanced communication, meaning that there's this reliance on electronics, especially now in this day and age, like, is that I could be reached at any time, right? My phone is my window to the world. So I can get an email from a student or another professor or whatever. And I'm constantly being able to be reached. There's also this prevalence of multiple roles, like wearing multiple hats, right? Either to gain promotion or to increase pay or just within one's role. And that can also negatively impact. And then also trying to switch hats, I'm teacher Brittany, and then I switch a hat to be like friend Brittany, and how quickly can I do that? And what are the implications of that? So moving on to psychological contract, which basically is the belief that people hold regarding the terms of an exchange agreement between them and the organization. This has received a lot of attention within the 21st century, especially because long-term employment is seen as being increasingly rare. It's like I have a contract that I'm going to work at a company for a significant amount of time or not very much time. And so what is my psychological contract, meaning what's my investment in regards to what I do at work, my work attitude, my job performance, etc. So it has a connection to job embeddedness, which we talked about earlier. Job crafting. This is where self-initiated changes that the individual actively makes to their job to help them increase interesting characteristics and decrease unpleasant job demands. So this isn't like, oh, I only pick and choose what I want to do. It's more of seen as like a proactive engagement, like work engagement with the things that are that give me joy or life within work, and then seeking ways to either delegate or very efficiently, quickly do the things that don't give me as much joy or engagement. It's a relatively new construct. There's a lot of research that's going into it, but it's still very new. And then there's work-related attitudes and emotions from a cross-cultural perspective. So something to take in consideration, particularly within global companies, right? So you have individualism and job satisfaction as being positively correlated in some cultures, like the USA, for example, like we really value individualism and job satisfaction, whereas collectivism and job satisfaction are positively correlated in other cultures, such as Japan, right? I'm a part of a collective, and that increases job satisfaction within Japan. So there's also something as the degree of fit related to emotional reactions to work and subsequent work behaviors. It's important that global companies figure out how to balance values and work if they're concerned about the satisfaction of their employees in a differing cultural environment, especially when those individuals are working together on a team, ensuring that there's understanding and open communication in order to ensure work-life satisfaction. So, yes. All right. Well, yeah, that's it. Really quick. It goes really fast, I guess, when I'm doing it virtually because I don't have as much engagement with you guys or ask questions or anything like that. But that's it for chapter 9. I look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday, and we can talk more about what you thought about this, telelearning experience. And yeah, go into more conversations about your final project and topics. I know a couple of you still need to work on getting your topics submitted, so we need to talk about that. But otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Bye. Oh, don't forget to take your pre-quiz. Pre-quiz. Okay, bye.